"Don't you dare come to my wedding. Ethan doesn't want you there. You're a stranger to us now." She said it in the doorway, not over the phone, not in a message I could ignore, standing 3 feet away from me with her hand still on the frame like she needed something to hold on to. My daughter said that to me. We were in my front yard in West Hartford, late afternoon, the sun still warm on the roses I'd just watered. The hose was still running behind me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step forward. I just looked at her. Her eyes didn't move, not once. This wasn't a slip, not something said in anger that she would take back in the next breath. The way she held herself tight, rehearsed, almost braced, told me she'd already said those words in her head before she ever brought them here. Something about it felt wrong, not just hurtful, wrong. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this didn't start with her. What happened after that moment didn't just change a wedding, it changed everything I thought I understood about my own life. My name is Alice Porter. I'm 59 years old, and until recently I thought I understood my daughter better than anyone in the world. For most of her life it was just the two of us. Her father left when she was 3. No long explanation, no drawn-out goodbye, just a quiet exit and a stack of bills that suddenly became my responsibility. I picked up extra shifts at Hartford General, worked nights when I had to, mornings when I could. I learned how to stretch a paycheck, how to make birthdays feel special without spending much, how to sit through school plays half asleep and still clap like it was the best thing I'd ever seen. Sophie was never an easy child, but she was a good one. Thoughtful, observant, the kind of girl who noticed when I was tired and would bring me tea without saying anything. We had a rhythm, Sunday calls when she moved away, long conversations about work life, small frustrations that didn't seem small at the time. If you're listening to this, I'm curious, where are you watching from? And have you ever had someone you trusted completely say something that made you stop and question everything you thought you knew about them? Because that's where this story really begins. After Sophie graduated from Boston University, she stayed in the city, found a job at a mid-sized digital marketing agency. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, stable. She had her own apartment in the Seaport district, small but bright, with a view of the harbor if you leaned just right by the window. We talked every Sunday, sometimes longer. She told me about campaigns, co-workers, the kind of office politics that always sounds worse when you're living inside it. I listened, gave advice when she asked, kept quiet when she didn't. It was simple. It worked. Then about 6 months before the wedding, she mentioned him, Ethan Caldwell. At first he was just a name dropped into conversation, a co-worker, someone she grabbed coffee with between meetings. She said he was driven, smart, different in a way she didn't quite explain. I remember smiling into the phone, telling her that sounded promising, that she deserved someone who challenged her, but there was something in her voice that I couldn't quite place. Not hesitation exactly, not excitement either. Something in between. Like she was choosing her words more carefully than usual. When I asked if I could meet him, she paused. "Maybe later, Mom," she said. "We're just taking things slow." I didn't push. I told myself that was normal, healthy even. Young people didn't rush introductions the way my generation did, but slow didn't stay slow for long. Within weeks, his name came up more often. Then every call. Then sometimes not at all, like she was editing him out of the story on purpose. And that was new. I started noticing smaller things. She ended our calls earlier than she used to, laughed less. When I asked about her week, she'd give shorter answers, efficient, polite, as if we were checking in, not talking. Once I asked what she was doing that weekend. "Just staying in," she said. In the background I heard a man's voice, low, too far from the phone to make out words, but close enough that it didn't belong to the room she was describing. I didn't mention it. Not then. A few days later, she sent me a photo, the two of them, standing outside what looked like a restaurant. He had his arm around her shoulders, well-dressed, confident in the way some people are when they know exactly how they're being seen. Sophie smiled in the picture, but it wasn't her full smile. It sat a little too still on her face, like she was holding it there. I zoomed in on the image longer than I should have. Not because of him, but because of her. I told myself I was overthinking. That distance makes everything feel sharper than it really is. Still, something didn't settle, and for the first time in years, our Sunday calls started to feel thinner. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in. At first, it was just how often Ethan's name came up. Then it was how carefully Sophie talked around him, like she was deciding in real time what I was allowed to hear. A week later, she mentioned they'd gone out again. Dinner this time, somewhere in Back Bay. She described the place, the lighting, the food, but when I asked what he was like, she paused just a second too long. He's focused, she said. He knows what he wants. She used to tell me what people ordered at dinner. Now she just summarized him. That answer stayed with me longer than it should have. Within a month, coffee turned into, we've been seeing each other a lot, then into he's been staying over sometimes. The progression wasn't unusual. People move fast all the time. I'd seen it at the hospital, heard it in conversations with coworkers, relationships that went from casual to serious in a matter of weeks. But this felt different, not because it was fast, because of how quiet she became about it. When Sophie was excited about something, she used to talk in details. She'd tell me how a conversation went, what someone said, how she felt in the moment. Now everything sounded like a summary. He's great. We're good. It's going well. 3 sentences. Clean. Finished. One Sunday I tried again. Maybe I could come up next weekend, I said lightly. We could all have dinner. I'd love to meet him. There was that pause again. Things are kind of busy right now, she replied. Work's intense and he's traveling a lot. Traveling. That was new. Where to? I asked. Just around. Client stuff. She moved past it quickly. Too quickly. I let it go, but I started paying attention in a different way after that. Not pushing, not questioning directly, just listening more closely. A few weeks later, she told me they were spending more time together at his place. Then that he'd helped her rethink a few things about her schedule, her priorities, even some friendships she'd had for years. He just has a clearer perspective, she said. He's been through more. Sophie had always been independent. She didn't usually look to other people to define her choices. Hearing her talk like that, like she was adjusting herself to fit someone else's view, felt unfamiliar. I told myself it was just part of being in a relationship. Compromise, growth, all the things people say when they want to believe something is healthy. Still, I asked again if I could meet him. Soon, she said this time. I promise. But soon kept moving. Another month passed. Our calls got shorter. Sometimes she'd reschedule them entirely. Other times she'd sound distracted, like she was half listening, her attention pulled somewhere else in the room. Once in the middle of a conversation, she lowered her voice suddenly. Hold on, she said, covering the phone. I heard a muffled exchange, a man's voice, firm, controlled. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. Not loud. Not aggressive, just certain. When she came back, her energy had shifted. Sorry, she said quickly. What were you saying? I repeated myself, but she didn't really answer. She just agreed the way people do when they want a conversation to end. After we hung up, I sat there for a while staring at my phone. I wasn't worried yet, but I wasn't comfortable either. Then one evening, she called outside of our usual time. That alone caught my attention. Mom, she said, a little breathless. I wanted you to hear it from me first. There was a brightness in her voice I hadn't heard in weeks. Real this time. Unfiltered. We're engaged. For a second, I didn't respond. Not because I wasn't happy for her, but because I was trying to place the timeline in my head. How long have you two been together? I asked, softer than I intended. About 4 months, she said quickly. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels right. 4 months. I swallowed the instinct to question it. Well, I said, forcing warmth into my voice, that's big news. Congratulations. Thank you, she replied. We're really excited. We talked for a few more minutes. About the ring, about how he proposed, something about a dinner, a view of the harbor, a speech she described but didn't quite quote. Again, details without texture. Before we hung up, I asked the question I'd been holding on to. When do I get to meet him? This time the pause was longer. Soon, she said again. We just need to figure out schedules. Schedules. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Of course, I said. Whenever works. After the call ended, I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and leaned against it, letting the silence settle around me. Engaged. To a man I had never met. A man who seemed to exist in fragments, short descriptions, edited moments of voice in the background of calls that used to belong entirely to me. I walked out into the yard more out of habit than intention. The roses were starting to bloom, the first real color of the season pushing through. Normally, I would have taken a picture and sent it to her. This time, I didn't. I stood there instead, replaying the past few months in my head. The pauses, the shorter calls, the way she'd started choosing her words. Nothing I could point to as proof, just a pattern that didn't sit right, and a growing sense that things were moving faster than I was being allowed to see. The engagement changed the rhythm between us almost overnight. Before, even with the distance, there had still been a sense that Sophie and I were moving in the same direction, just from different places. After she said yes to Ethan, it felt like she'd stepped onto a path I couldn't see. The wedding plans started quickly. Faster than I expected. It's going to be small, she told me on one of our calls. Intimate. Just close people. Of course, I said. Whatever makes you happy. There was a beat of silence before she added, almost as an afterthought, "We're thinking destination, somewhere warm. Easy for everyone to just focus on the day." Where I asked. "The Bahamas," she said. "There's a resort Ethan found. It's beautiful." I pictured it as she spoke, white sand, open sky, the kind of place people chose when they wanted everything to look effortless. It sounded like her in a way. She'd always loved the idea of something clean and simple. "When is it?" I asked. "June," she said. "It gives us just enough time. Just enough." I didn't say it out loud, but the timeline tightened again in my chest. Everything about this felt accelerated, like decisions were being made just a step ahead of where I could follow. Still, she sounded sure, and that mattered. A few days later, she sent me a link to the resort, photos of the venue, the rooms, the ceremony space set up along the water. It was expensive. Not wildly so, but enough that I understood what she meant when she said intimate. I called her that evening. "It's beautiful," I told her. "Have you started putting deposits down?" There was a brief hesitation. "We're working through it," she said. "There are a lot of moving parts." I could hear the strain beneath her words. Not panic, just pressure. The kind that builds quietly when there's more to manage than you expected. "I can help," I said. She didn't respond immediately. "Mom, you don't have to. I want to," I interrupted gently. "Let me be part of this. It's your wedding." Another pause, shorter this time. "Okay," she said finally, "that would help." We worked out the details over the next few days. The resort required a deposit to secure the date. The catering package needed to be locked in early. Photography, flowers, everything came with its own timeline, its own deadline. I transferred the first amount that week. I remember hovering over the confirm button for a second longer than usual, then I pressed it anyway. I remember checking the amount twice before hitting send. I always do. Not all at once. Piece by piece as things came up. Each time Sophie thanked me, but the tone was different, shorter, more efficient. "Got it, thank you." She used to call me after things like that, not text. "Payment went through. Really appreciate it." There was nothing wrong with the words themselves. They were polite, grateful even, but they felt transactional, like we were coordinating something, not sharing it. I tried to keep the conversations going beyond that. "Have you picked a dress yet?" I asked one night. "I'm looking," she said. "Ethan has opinions about the venue aesthetic, so I want it to match." I smiled faintly at that, though she couldn't see it. "He sounds very involved. He just wants everything to be right," she replied quickly. "Right." Another time I asked if his parents were coming. "They are," she said, "flying in from London. Have you met them?" A small pause. Briefly, she said, "Over video." "Over video." I nodded to myself again the way I'd started doing more often. Every answer gave me something, but never enough to feel complete. The transfers continued over the next few weeks, each one tied to a new piece of the wedding coming together, each one moving us closer to a date I was supposed to be part of, but still didn't fully feel included in. Our calls kept getting shorter. Sometimes she'd text instead of calling. "Can we talk later? Busy tonight?" "Quick update, venue confirmed. Running out, talk soon." soon became a placeholder, a way to delay something that used to happen naturally. One evening, I tried calling her outside our usual time. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I didn't think much of it at first. She had a life, work, planning, all the things that come with building something new. But when I called again the next day and got the same result, a small unease settled in. I sent a text. "Everything okay?" No response. Hours passed, then a full day. I told myself not to overreact, that she was busy, that this was normal. By the second evening, I called again. Voicemail. I set my phone down and walked into the kitchen, trying to focus on something ordinary: the dishes in the sink, the mail on the counter, anything that didn't involve the quiet stretch of time between messages. When the phone finally buzzed, it startled me. A message from Sophie. My heart lifted before I even opened it. Relief came first, quick and automatic. Maybe she'd just been overwhelmed. Maybe this would explain everything. I wiped my hands on a towel and tapped the screen. The message filled the display in one block of text. "Don't come to the wedding. Ethan doesn't want you there. You've been interfering too much. You're a stranger to us now." I read it once, then again. The words didn't change. For a moment I thought I'd misunderstood, that I was reading too quickly, that my eyes were pulling meaning from something that wasn't there. But it was there. Clear, direct, final. My hand tightened around the phone without me realizing it. Interfering. A stranger. I stood there in my own kitchen, surrounded by the quiet details of a life I had built piece by piece, and none of it made sense against what I was reading. I tried calling her immediately, straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. I typed a response. "Sophie, what's going on? Please call me." I stared at the message for a second before hitting send, as if there were still a version of this where she would read it and realize something had gone wrong. No reply. The room felt smaller than it had a few minutes before, like the walls had shifted in just enough to make everything tighter. I lowered myself into the chair at the kitchen table and set the phone in front of me, screen still lit. 32 years. Every shift, every sacrifice, every decision I'd made with her in mind. And this was what I was holding. Not a conversation, not an explanation. A statement. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't over. I kept staring at the screen, waiting for it to feel less real. It didn't. I didn't sleep that night. Not even close. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone dimming and lighting again each time I checked it, as if something might change if I looked often enough. It didn't. No missed calls, no new messages, just that one sentence sitting there unchanged, as steady as a fact I hadn't agreed to. By early morning, the shock had thinned into something sharper. Not panic, not even sadness, not in the way I expected. Clarity. I got up before sunrise, made coffee I barely touched, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. My bank account stared back at me. 3 transfers over the past weeks. The resort deposit, the catering, the photography and flowers, $45,000. Money I had saved slowly, carefully. Extra shifts, missed trips, small choices that added up over years. Money I had given freely. To a wedding I was now not allowed to attend. My hand hovered over the trackpad for a moment. Then I started canceling what I could. Not everything was reversible, but enough of it was still pending, enough to stop the rest from going through. Each confirmation felt quiet. No drama, no announcement, just a series of decisions made one after another. When I finished, I closed the laptop and sat back. If I was a stranger, then I wasn't responsible anymore. The house stayed still around me for the rest of the morning. No calls, no messages. Just the normal sounds of a weekday, cars passing, a lawnmower somewhere down the street, the world continuing as if nothing had shifted. It wasn't until the next day that something finally broke through. A sharp knock at the front door. Not tentative, not polite, urgent. I already knew who it was before I stood up. When I opened the door, Sophie was there. She looked different. Not just tired, though she was that too. Her hair pulled back too quickly, strands loose around her face. No makeup, her eyes swollen like she hadn't slept either. But it was more than that. There was a tension in her, like something was pressing from the inside. "Mom," she said, her voice catching. "What did you do?" I didn't step aside to let her in. I stayed where I was, one hand still on the door. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Her breath came quicker now. "You canceled the payments," she said. "The resort called this morning. They said the deposit didn't clear, the caterer too. Everything's on hold, so that was it. Not an apology, not confusion, a problem to fix. The wedding is in 3 weeks." She continued, her voice rising. 3 weeks, Mom. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" I held her gaze. "You told me not to come," I said quietly. "You said I was a stranger." Her expression tightened. "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly. "I was upset. Ethan and I had a fight, and you told me not to come to your wedding," I repeated. "You told me he didn't want me there." She hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. "That's not what this is about," she said, shaking her head. "You're making this about yourself when it's not. This is about you trying to control things. You always do this." The words landed harder than I expected. "Name one time," I said. She blinked. "One time I've ever used money to control you." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked past me, out toward the yard, like the answer might be waiting somewhere outside the conversation. "You can't," I said, "because it's never happened." "That's not fair," she snapped, her voice breaking. "You don't see how you come across. You always have an opinion. You always think you know what's best." "I raised you," I said, not louder, just steadier. "I was supposed to have an opinion." "This is exactly what I mean," she shot back. "You don't listen. You just decide." I felt something shift in my chest, but I didn't let it reach my voice. "I listened when you said you didn't want me at the wedding," I said. "I respected that." "That's not respecting it," she said. "That's punishing me." "No," I replied. "It's adjusting to the reality you gave me." She stared at me, her eyes filling again. "Please," she said, softer now. "Just fix it. We can talk about everything else later. Just put the payments back. We don't have time for this right now. We've already committed to things," she added. "You can't just pull out now." She didn't ask how I felt. She went straight to the money. There it was. Not about what she said, not about how it landed, about the timeline, the logistics, the pressure closing in. "Do you want me at the wedding?" I asked. The question sat between us. Simple, direct. She didn't answer right away. She started, then stopped. "I'll talk to Ethan." I nodded slowly. "That's not an answer. He's my fiancé," she said, frustration creeping back in. "I can't just ignore how he feels. And you can ignore how I feel." Her face crumpled. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why are you making everything harder?" I took a breath, keeping my voice level. "I'm not making it harder," I said. "I'm just not funding something I'm not part of." She shook her head, stepping back from the doorway. "So that's it," she said. "You're just done." I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said quietly. "You were done first. I'm just accepting it." The words hung there, heavier than anything else we'd said. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, frustration, and something deeper tangled together. "This isn't over," she said. "No," I agreed, "it's not." She stood there for another second, like she might say something else. Then she turned and walked down the path, her steps quick, uneven. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, letting the weight of the conversation settle. For a few minutes I didn't move. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. A message from her. "Please think about this." I looked at the screen, then set it face down on the table. I didn't answer. I don't know if you've ever had a moment where someone you love draws a line like that, where respect suddenly feels conditional, tied to whether you comply. Would you have given in just to keep the peace, or held your ground knowing it might cost you everything? Stay with me, because what happened next made that choice matter more than I ever expected. I walked back into the kitchen and stood by the counter, my hands resting flat against the surface. Something about that conversation kept replaying in my head, not just what she said, how she said it, and who she seemed to be speaking for. The house felt different after she left, not louder, not quieter, just settled in a way that made everything sharper. I stayed in the kitchen for a while, replaying the conversation, not just the words, but the rhythm of it, the way Sophie paused before saying his name, the way everything seemed to circle back to him. That was the part I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just what she said. It was how much of it didn't sound like her. I told myself to step back, to breathe, to give it time. But something in me had already shifted, not into panic, into focus. If I couldn't understand what was happening through her, I would have to understand it another way. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. Ethan Caldwell. I typed the name slowly. I don't usually do this. I'm not the kind of person who looks people up. At first, everything looked exactly as it should. Clean. Professional. The kind of profile that gives away nothing. Consulting. Flexible work. A polished image that matched the version Sophie had described. On the surface, it worked, but the more I looked, the more it felt thin, like something built to look solid from the outside. I moved past the basics and started paying attention to what wasn't obvious. Photos, different places, different nights, different people. But one thing stayed the same. He was never alone. Sometimes a group, sometimes just one woman beside him. Different faces. Same kind of photo, same kind of smile, same framing, same closeness. Different woman. Not enough to accuse, but enough to notice. I searched a little deeper. Addresses came up. Cambridge, Brookline, then another too close together to feel stable. Moves happen. But this felt tight. Then something else surfaced. A vehicle record. Repossessed. 2 years ago. I stared at it for a moment. That didn't match the image. Not the clothes, not the lifestyle, not the version of himself he presented so carefully. Debt. The word settled quietly in my mind. I went back to everything I had just seen. No clear long-term clients, no consistent timeline, no real foundation behind the image, just pieces. And suddenly they didn't feel separate anymore. They felt connected. I thought about Sophie's apartment. The cost. The way she said he had perspective, or influence. I went back to the photos again. Different women. Different settings. Same positioning. Close enough to suggest something. Distant enough to deny it. It wasn't proof, but it was repetition. And repetition builds patterns. I remember thinking, if this was a pattern, then I wasn't looking at a relationship anymore. I was looking at something that had already happened before. I sat back, my fingers resting on the edge of the laptop. I didn't have enough to say anything definitive, but I had more than I did yesterday, and more than I was comfortable ignoring. The question wasn't whether something was off anymore. It was how far it went. I closed the laptop slowly. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same. He wasn't just a name anymore. He was a variable, and Sophie was already too far inside this to see it clearly. I looked out the window, the late afternoon light stretching across the yard. That same clarity settled in again. This wasn't something I could wait out. If I was going to understand it, I needed something solid. I didn't call Sophie that night. Not after everything I had seen. Not with questions I couldn't prove. Instead, I reached for something I could control. The next morning, I called Daniel Brooks. He had been my lawyer for years. Steady, precise. The kind of man who didn't make decisions for you. If I was going to change anything legally, financially, I wanted it done right. He saw me that same morning. His office hadn't changed. Same quiet room. Same measured calm. "Alice," he said, "you sounded serious." "I am." I sat down across from him. "I need to change my will." He nodded, waiting. I took a breath. "I want to remove Sophie as my primary beneficiary." "I never thought I'd say that sentence out loud." He didn't interrupt. "Are you sure?" he asked after a moment. "This isn't something people usually decide quickly." "It's not quick," I said. "It just took me time to see it clearly." He studied me, then nodded once. "All right," he said, "then we'll make it clear." We went through the structure simply. Everything that had once gone to Sophie wouldn't anymore. "I don't want her to have direct access," I said. "Not like before." He made a note. "We can redirect it," he said. "Limit control, set conditions." I nodded. If she has children someday, I said I don't want them affected by her decisions, but I don't want her managing anything. Understood. And the rest I paused. Years of work, quiet choices, everything I had built piece by piece. I want it divided, I said, part to the American Cancer Society, part to a scholarship fund. He looked up briefly, then wrote it down. There's one more thing, he added. If you remove her completely, it can be challenged. Some people leave a symbolic amount. I understood. Do that, I said. Something small. He nodded. We finished the rest quickly. Names, percentages, final structure. Nothing emotional about it. Just decisions. I signed 2 days later. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. It was simple. A few signatures, a notary. And just like that, everything changed. Sophie went from inheriting everything to almost nothing. There was no announcement, no conversation, just a reality she didn't know yet. Driving home, I expected to feel something heavier. Regret, doubt. But I didn't. What I felt was steadiness. For the first time since that message, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. I sat in the driveway for a moment looking at the house. Nothing about it had changed, but what it meant had. I stepped inside. My phone was still on the counter. Silent. No calls. No messages. I thought about telling her, not as a threat, just as truth. I didn't. There would be a time for that. This wasn't it. I walked to the window and looked out across the yard. Everything outside looked the same. Inside, nothing was. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a new reality had taken shape quietly, without warning, but completely. One I was finally prepared to face. 3 days passed before I heard from them again. Not one message, not one missed call. Then all at once, everything came in. My phone lit up while I was in the garden trimming back a rose that had grown too far over the walkway. I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked it up. A text from Sophie. Mom, can we talk? I stared at the screen for a moment before unlocking it. Then another message followed almost immediately. I'm sorry. About what I said. I didn't mean it like that. I read it twice. The words were right. The tone was softer, familiar even, but something about it felt positioned. Before I could respond, another message came in. Different name. Ethan. Mrs. Porter. I owe you an apology. I handled things poorly the other day. I'd appreciate the chance to speak with you directly. I let out a slow breath. So that was the approach now. Not distance, not exclusion, repair, or at least the appearance of it. A few seconds later, Sophie called. I answered this time. Hi, I said. Her voice came through quickly. Mom, thank you for picking up. There was relief there. Real or not, I couldn't tell. I got your messages, I said. I know, she replied. I wanted to say it out loud. I shouldn't have said those things. I was stressed and everything's been a lot and I took it out on you. I listened. I'm sorry, she added. The word hung between us. It was what I should have wanted to hear. Okay, I said. There was a small pause on the line, like she had expected more. Ethan wants to talk to you, she continued carefully. He feels really bad about how everything happened. I leaned back against the counter, letting my weight settle. He does? I asked. Yes, she said quickly. He thinks there was a misunderstanding about intentions, about boundaries. Boundaries. That's an interesting word, I said. She exhaled softly. Can we just sit down together, she asked. The three of us. Talk like adults. Clear the air. I considered it. Every instinct in me said no, but another part, the part that still recognized her voice, the part that remembered who she had been before, all of this held me there a second longer. Fine, I said. You can come by. Thank you, she said, the relief in her voice immediate. We'll come by this afternoon. Of course. I ended the call and set the phone down. The house felt different again, not tense, not quiet, just expectant. I made coffee I didn't drink, straightened things that didn't need straightening, small movements to fill the time. When the knock came, it was lighter than before, measured. I opened the door. Sophie stood there first, cleaner this time, composed. Her hair done, her expression controlled like she had rehearsed something in her head before arriving. Ethan stood just behind her. Up close, he looked exactly like he had in the photos. Well put together. Calm. His posture relaxed in a way that didn't quite feel natural. It looked practiced. "Alice," he said, stepping forward slightly. "Thank you for seeing us." His tone was even, respectful, polished. I didn't move aside immediately. Then after a second I stepped back just enough to let them in. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Sophie used to do homework, where we used to talk for hours about things that now felt very far away. Ethan waited until we were all seated before speaking. "I want to start by apologizing," he said, "for how things were handled. I take responsibility for my part in that." His words were smooth, controlled, each one placed carefully. "I was trying to protect our relationship," he continued, "and in doing that, I overstepped. I misread the situation." I said nothing. I assumed, he went on, that there was pressure being applied financially, emotionally, and I reacted to that. There it was. Not an apology, a repositioning. Sophie nodded beside him, watching me closely. "I've never pressured her," I said. "I understand that now," he replied quickly. "Or at least I'm beginning to see that I may have interpreted things incorrectly." "May have." "Ethan just didn't know you," Sophie added. "He's used to different family dynamics." "Different how?" I asked. She hesitated. "More involved," she said. I let that sit. "And you thought the solution was to remove me entirely?" I asked. Ethan leaned forward, slightly, his hands resting loosely on the table. "No," he said. "That was never the goal. The goal was to create space for Sophie to make her own decisions without feeling influenced." "Influenced? You mean without me?" I said. He gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I can see how it came across that way." "Came across?" Every answer circled back on itself. Soft enough to sound reasonable, vague enough to avoid landing anywhere solid. Sophie reached for my hand. "Mom, we're trying to fix this," she said. "We don't want things to be like they were the other day." She sounded like she had practiced that line. I looked at her. At the way she held my hand, not tightly, not loosely, just enough to feel like connection without fully committing to it. "What does fix look like?" I asked. She glanced at Ethan before answering. "We move forward," she said. "We focus on the wedding. We include you. We just let this go." She said "we" every time, not "I." "Let this go." "And the payments?" I asked. There it was, the smallest shift in the room, but enough. Ethan answered this time. "We were hoping," he said carefully, "that once we've cleared the misunderstanding, you might reconsider your decision. Not for us, for Sophie. The timing is tight and we're under a lot of pressure." Pressure. Not respect. Not relationship. Pressure. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel intentional. "So," I said slowly, "you'd like me to fund the wedding again?" Sophie's expression tightened. "That's not what this is about," she said quickly. "No," I asked. "It's about us being a family," she replied. "About not letting one argument ruin everything." One argument. I looked at her, really looked this time. "Read the message you sent me," I said. Her hand pulled back slightly. "Mom, read it," I repeated. She swallowed. "I was angry," she said. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then what did you mean?" I asked. She didn't answer. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about fixing anything. It was about seeing how much I was willing to give in. The room held still around us. I could feel something building again, not loud, not explosive, just steady. I hadn't raised my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm not funding something I'm not part of," I said. Sophie's eyes filled again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "I'm responding to what you made clear." Ethan shifted in his chair just slightly. "Alice," he said, his tone still measured with all due respect, "I think this situation is being escalated unnecessarily. We're offering to move forward, to include you. That should count for something." "It does," I said. "It tells me exactly where things stand." He held my gaze for a moment longer, and for the first time, Something in his expression slipped. Not anger. Not yet. But something closer to impatience. It was brief. Then it was gone. Replaced again with that same controlled calm. But I had seen it, and once you see something like that, you don't unsee it. I folded my hands on the table, steady. "Is there anything else you want to say?" I asked. Sophie looked between us, her breathing uneven now, like she was trying to hold something together that was already starting to come apart. "This isn't how this was supposed to go," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." The house felt quieter after they left, not the kind of quiet that settles, the kind that lingers. I stood by the table for a while, staring at the 2 empty chairs across from me. The space they had occupied still felt charged, like something unfinished had been left behind. Sophie hadn't called again that night, no follow-up, no message. Whatever had been said at that table that had been the conversation, I didn't try to reach out. For the first time since all of this started, I wasn't waiting for her to explain it. I was watching instead. The next few days passed without much change on the surface. Work, routine, the small, predictable movements of daily life. But underneath that, something had shifted into place. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was looking. And once you start looking with that kind of focus, things begin to show up. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then I picked up. "Hello." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Is this Alice Porter?" The voice was female. Controlled, but hesitant. "Yes," I said. "My name is Rachel Bennett," she continued. "I'm sorry to call you out of the blue. I think we might need to talk about Ethan Caldwell." Everything in me went still. I didn't respond right away. "How did you get my number?" I asked. "Public records," she said. "And a bit of guesswork. I wasn't sure it was right until you answered." There was no apology in her tone, just clarity. "What about Ethan?" I asked. Another pause. "I think he's done this before," she said. The words landed quietly. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just stated. "I'd like to meet you," she added. "In person, if possible. I don't think this is something that should be explained over the phone." I looked toward the window, the afternoon light cutting across the yard again in that same familiar way. "Where are you?" I asked. "Boston," she said. "I can come to you." I thought about it for a moment. "Tomorrow," I said. "Late morning." "That works," she replied. "Thank you." She didn't say anything else. Neither did I. We ended the call without ceremony. The next morning I cleaned the kitchen, not because it needed it, because I needed something to do with my hands. Rachel arrived 10 minutes early. She knocked once firm but not rushed. When I opened the door, she stood there with a folder in one hand and her bag over her shoulder. Mid-30s maybe, composed but not comfortable, like someone who had rehearsed this moment and still wasn't sure how it would go. "Alice," she asked. "Yes." "I'm Rachel." I stepped aside to let her in. We sat at the same table again. She didn't waste time. "I was engaged to him," she said. She didn't blink when she said it. No build-up, no hesitation. I felt the words settle before I responded. "How long ago?" I asked. "About 1.5 years," she said. "We were together for 6 months, engaged for 1. The timeline echoed too closely to what I had just lived through. "How did it end?" I asked. She let out a small breath, her fingers tightening slightly on the edge of the folder. "It didn't," she said. "Not in the way it should have." She opened the folder and slid a few papers across the table. Bank statements. Transfers. Amounts highlighted. "He told me he needed help bridging contracts," she said. "Short-term gaps, client payments delayed, things that made sense when you didn't question them too hard." I looked down at the numbers, not small, and then I asked. "He disappeared," she said simply. The room held still, phone off, apartment empty. The company he said he was working with, no record of him beyond a few short-term contracts. Everything just dissolved. I glanced back up at her. "And you found him again?" I asked. "I wasn't looking for him," she said. I moved on. Or tried to. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, unlocking it with a quick movement. Then a friend sent me something, she said, turning the screen toward me. A photo. I recognized it immediately. Ethan, standing outside a restaurant, Sophie beside him. The same photo Sophie had sent me months ago. I saw this, Rachel continued, and I knew it wasn't a coincidence. My eyes stayed on the screen for a second longer before I looked up. "You're sure?" I asked. "Yes," she said. No hesitation. "He follows the same pattern," she went on. "It starts small. Attention, consistency. He mirrors what you need. Then he isolates. Subtly. Not by telling you to cut people off, but by making you feel like they don't understand you anymore." I thought about the pauses in Sophie's voice, the shorter calls, the way she had started choosing her words. "He creates pressure," Rachel said. "Time pressure, emotional pressure, financial pressure. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels like it has to happen now. It never feels like pressure when you're inside it. The wedding, 3 weeks, the deposits. He positions himself as the only stable point," she added, "the only one who sees clearly. Perspective." The word came back sharper now. "And the money?" I asked. "He doesn't ask all at once," she said. "He builds to it, makes it feel reasonable, necessary, temporary." I looked down at the statements again. "How much?" I asked. She gave a small, humorless smile. "Enough," she said. "And I'm not the only one." She slid another sheet toward me. Names, not many, but more than one, each with dates, each within a similar pattern of time. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from confirmation. This wasn't random. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was structure. "He's careful," Rachel said. "He stays just inside what's legally difficult to prove, moves before things can catch up to him." I leaned back in my chair, letting everything settle into place. Every piece I had noticed, every gap, every inconsistency, they weren't separate anymore. They connected. "Why tell me?" I asked. She met my gaze. "Because someone should have told me," she said. The simplicity of it sat heavier than anything else she had said. We didn't speak for a moment after that. The information was there. Clear. Complete. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't trying to interpret it. I understood it. For the first time, I wasn't hoping I was wrong. I knew I wasn't. I closed the folder slowly, my hands steady against the table. Rachel watched me, not pushing, not filling the silence. She didn't need to. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. I looked down at the papers one last time, then back up. I didn't answer right away, because the answer was already forming, and it wasn't a small one. I didn't rush the decision, but I didn't delay it either. By that evening, I had already booked the flight. West Hartford to Boston, Boston to Nassau. A tight connection, but manageable. The wedding was in 2 days, just enough time to get there without drawing attention too early. I didn't tell Sophie. I didn't tell anyone. Rachel agreed to come with me. "I want to see this through," she said when I asked. So we kept everything quiet. No announcements, no messages, no warning. The next morning, we were on a plane. The flight was uneventful. People reading, sleeping, moving through their own routines. I sat by the window watching the clouds drift beneath us, trying not to think too far ahead. Rachel sat beside me, calm but focused. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. When we landed in Nassau, the heat settled in immediately. Warm, heavy air that made everything feel slower, almost suspended. The airport moved quickly, though tourists, families, couples, all heading towards something they had been planning for weeks or months. We moved through it like we belonged there. Just another arrival. The drive to Atlantis Paradise Island was short. The resort rose into view gradually, first distant, then unmistakable. Large, controlled, polished in a way that made everything feel intentional. It matched the image perfectly. Of course it did. We checked in without issue. I used my own name. There was no reason to hide it. As far as anyone here knew, I was still a guest. They handed me a welcome drink like I was there to celebrate. The receptionist smiled, handed us the keys, and pointed us toward the elevators. Nothing unusual. That was the part that stayed with me. Everything about this was built to feel normal. We dropped our bags and went back down. The ceremony space was already being set up. Rows of white chairs lined the sand in perfect order. An arch stood near the water, draped in light fabric that shifted slightly with the breeze. Staff moved in quiet coordination, adjusting details that would only matter if something went wrong. It was exactly how Sophie had described it: simple, clean, controlled. I stood at the edge of the space watching. Rachel stayed a step behind me. "That's him," she said quietly. I followed her gaze. Ethan stood near the far end, speaking with one of the coordinators. He looked completely at ease, relaxed, like he had nothing to manage, nothing to worry about, like this was his space. Sophie appeared a moment later, walking toward him from the opposite side. She wore a light dress, something simple for the rehearsal. Her hair was loosely tied back. From a distance, she looked fine, maybe even happy. He turned when he saw her, smiled. She smiled back. It looked right. It just didn't feel right. It was quick, natural on the surface, but I could see the difference now. The way she adjusted her posture slightly when she reached him, the way he angled his body just enough to lead the interaction without making it obvious. Small things, easy to miss, not anymore. Rachel stepped closer. "Same pattern," she said under her breath. I nodded. We stayed there a little longer, watching the rhythm of the space. Who moved where? How conversations formed and ended, the way everything flowed toward a single moment that hadn't happened yet. Then we walked away. No confrontation. Not yet. Back in the room, I spread everything out on the desk. The statements, the names, the timeline Rachel had shown me. I went through them again, slower this time, not searching, confirming. Every detail aligned. Every piece reinforced the next. There was no doubt left. Only timing. Rachel sat across from me, quiet, letting me move through it at my own pace, when she asked after a while. I looked at the papers, then out toward the ocean beyond the window. "Tomorrow," I said. The word felt steady. There was nothing left to prepare, nothing left to question, only the moment ahead and the space between now and then. The ceremony began just before sunset. The chairs were filled, soft music drifted across the sand. The ocean moved behind it, all steady and indifferent, as if none of this mattered to it. I stood near the back, not hidden, just not announced. Rachel was a few steps behind me, quiet, watching. Sophie walked down the aisle slowly. The dress fit her perfectly, simple, elegant, exactly what she had described months ago before everything shifted. For a moment, looking at her like that, it was easy to remember the version of her that used to call me every Sunday. Ethan waited at the front, composed as always. Calm. Certain. Like this was just another moment he had already calculated. The officiant spoke. The words blurred together. I wasn't listening. I was waiting. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, that was the moment. I stepped forward. I do. For a second, no one moved. The music cut off mid-note like someone had forgotten to let it finish. A few heads turned first, then more. Chairs creaked softly as people shifted, trying to see without being obvious. The officiant blinked, still holding the folder in his hands, unsure whether to continue or step back. Sophie didn't turn right away. She just stood there, frozen in place, her fingers tightening slightly around the bouquet. Someone in the second row whispered something under their breath. Another voice answered lower, more cautious. The ocean kept moving behind them, steady, unchanged, like none of this belonged to it. Then, slowly, Sophie turned, and every eye followed her. The words didn't need to be loud. They carried anyway. Every head turned. Sophie froze. Ethan didn't move at first. Then slowly his expression shifted, not to shock, but to something sharper. Recognition. I walked down the aisle, each step steady. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said, my voice even. "This is a pattern." Rachel stepped forward beside me. "I was engaged to him," she said clearly. "Before you." A murmur moved through the guests. I placed the documents on the small table near the front. Bank statements, names, dates, enough to be seen even from a distance. "He does this," Rachel continued. "Over and over, different people, same story." Sophie's eyes moved between us, confusion breaking into something else. "Ethan," she said. He didn't answer. Not right away. Then he stepped back. Just one step. It was small, but it was enough. The room shifted with it. None of this is accurate, he said finally, but his voice had changed. The control was thinner, now stretched. Then stay, I said. Explain it. He didn't. He looked at Sophie once, quick assessing, and then turned. Walked. Not fast, not running, but leaving. 2 security staff moved after him, already alerted by something beyond us. Maybe a call, maybe a signal I hadn't seen. By the time they reached the edge of the setup, he was already being stopped. Voices rose, movement broke the stillness. And just like that, the structure of the day collapsed. Sophie stood where she was unmoving. Then slowly she stepped back. Her gaze dropped to the papers. Then to me. Mom. Her voice broke. I didn't know. Her voice sounded younger than it had in months. I nodded once. I know. She walked toward me, unsteady now, the distance between us closing in a way it hadn't in weeks. I'm so sorry, she said, the words coming apart as she spoke them. I didn't see it. I thought I understood everything. I reached for her hand. You don't have to understand everything I said quietly. Just don't ignore what feels wrong. She held on. Tighter this time. The ceremony didn't continue. Someone started stacking chairs before the music even stopped. People left in quiet groups, conversations low and uncertain. The ocean kept moving unchanged, as if reminding us how small the moment really was. We stayed there for a while after, not talking much, just standing. The way we used to before, everything became complicated. Some damage doesn't show right away, but it changes how you see everything that comes after. If you were in that moment, would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Or spoken up and risked losing someone you love? I'm really curious what you would have done. Tell me below. And if this story stayed with you, you can share or follow for more like this. I almost lost her, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else.